On December 22, 1941, just 2 weeks after Pearl Harbor, Winston Churchill arrived in Washington to meet with President Roosevelt. The British Prime Minister was grateful for a new ally in his fight against the Axis and outspoken in his opinion of the enemy.
What kind of a people do they think we are? Is it possible they do not realize that we shall never cease to persevere against them until they have been taught a lesson which they and the world will never forget?
FDR and Churchill met for 2 weeks, plotting their war strategy. The leaders agreed that defeating Hitler would be their top priority. Once Europe was freed, Allied forces could be redeployed to help the U.S. defeat Japan. The plan was set. But through the bleak months of 1942, the Nazi war machine marched on. In the Atlantic, Germany's submarine attack groups, Wolfpacks, devastated Allied shipping. Nazi influence spread through the Mediterranean and into North Africa, threatening British colonies there. On the Eastern Front, German forces pushed deep into the Soviet Union and descended on the city of Stalingrad. In the skies over Europe, German anti-aircraft artillery exacted a heavy toll on Allied warplanes. President Roosevelt knew the first step toward victory in Europe was to secure the transatlantic supply lines.
The Axis powers can never achieve their objective of world domination unless they first obtain control of the sea.
To counter the U-boat menace, Allied warships began escorting supply ships across the sea in convoys. Air reconnaissance, long-range torpedo bombers, and the new technology of sonar helped the Allied forces spot and destroy the German subs. A major breakthrough came when the British cracked Germany's coded communications. As a result, the Battle of the Atlantic swung in favor of the Allies, and the German U-boat threat was neutralized. It was a critical turn in the war. With shipping lanes reopened, U.S. war supplies began to flow freely to Great Britain, and preparations began for the first Allied land offensive. It came in November 1942, as U.S. General Dwight Eisenhower led 107,000 Allied troops ashore in Morocco and Algeria in North Africa. The British Army was locked in a fierce battle with German General Erwin Rommel and his Axis forces. Eisenhower's troops battled eastward, while the British fought west, trapping the Axis army in Tunisia. Months of heavy fighting ensued, and 70,000 Allied lives were lost. But the Allies prevailed, and General Rommel was forced to flee to Germany, leaving his once unstoppable Afrika Korps to surrender. The war was far from over, but British Prime Minister Churchill knew the Battle of North Africa was a defining moment.
This is not the end. It is not even the beginning of the end. But it is perhaps the end of the beginning.
While the U.S. and Britain, the Western Allies, were fighting in North Africa, the Soviet Red Army refused to surrender the city of Stalingrad in the face of an overwhelming German onslaught. In November 1942, the Soviets launched a heroic counterattack. The violent struggle lasted for 2 months. As the bitter winter set in, the German army faced frostbite, lice, starvation, and defeat. The epic Battle of Stalingrad devastated the city and left over 1 million Russians dead. But now, the victorious Soviet army began a steady march westward towards Germany. By the summer of 1943, Allied warplanes were bombing German cities day and night, slowly reducing them to rubble. Most attacks were aimed at military and industrial targets, like bridges, supply depots, and factories. But increasingly, Allied air forces targeted civilian centers for so-called terror bombing, designed to demoralize the German public. In one raid on the city of Dresden, the Allies dropped tons of incendiary bombs, creating a firestorm that killed more than 100,000. Before the war's end, over 650,000 innocent Germans perished from Allied bombing. In July 1943, Allied troops struck off from North Africa in Operation Husky. Their mission was to invade Sicily, the stepping stone to the European continent. Within a month, the Italian island was under Allied control, and Italians revolted against their fascist leader, Benito Mussolini. Italy's king stripped Mussolini of power and turned his back on Hitler, quitting the Axis alliance. War-weary Italians rejoiced. Despite the success of Operation Husky, it would take another 18 months of bloody fighting to drive the remaining Axis forces out of Italy. In April 1945, Mussolini was captured by Italian resistance fighters while trying to flee the country. The once pompous dictator was executed, and his body hung in Milan Square. While the Soviet army marched through Poland and the Allies pushed north through Italy, Allied leaders finalized plans for the invasion of Nazi-occupied France and the liberation of Western Europe. The mission was codenamed Operation Overlord, but history would remember it as D-Day. It was the largest military operation ever mounted and would define an entire generation. The Allies would mount a massive assault across the English Channel onto the Normandy coast. Over 176,000 troops and 5,000 ships prepared for the operation. On June 5, 1944, Allied troops mobilized. Warplanes departed from Britain, dropping paratroopers behind enemy lines. Allied bombers strafed the coastline. Battleships pummeled German defenses, while amphibious landing craft crossed the English Channel toward Normandy. At daybreak on June 6, 1944, D-Day, British, Canadian, and American soldiers fought their way ashore. The Allies sustained heavy casualties, but managed to secure their beachheads, and the massive supplies needed to fight the ground war came ashore. President Roosevelt led the nation in prayer.
Our sons, pride of our nation, this day have set upon a mighty endeavor, a struggle to preserve our republic, our religion, and our civilization, and to set free a suffering humanity.
Within a month, there were 1 million Allied troops on the continent, fighting their way across France. As the Allies drew near to Paris, Hitler ordered the city burned. The German commander in charge refused, and on August 25, 1944, he surrendered the city to French resistance fighters. By September, France, Belgium, Luxembourg, and much of the Netherlands were freed from Nazi control, while the Soviet Red Army closed in on Germany from the east. By October, the Allies had captured the German city of Aachen, but Hitler ordered a counterattack near the border with Belgium. The resulting dent in the Allied line gave the fight its name, the Battle of the Bulge. The Allies were pushed back with heavy losses of men and equipment. 100,000 Nazi and 19,000 Allied soldiers were killed. But in the end, the German army was forced to retreat. It would be their last offensive. Hitler's dream of a 1,000-year Reich was crumbling. His country was in ruin, shattered by the onslaught of bombing and shelling. Over 5 million of his soldiers had surrendered to the advancing Allied armies, and the German spirit was broken. On April 23rd, the Soviet army stormed the German capital of Berlin. In the face of defeat, Adolf Hitler took his own life rather than surrender.
Here is a news flash. The German radio has just announced that Hitler is dead.
200,000 Russian soldiers died capturing Berlin. Finally, on May 7, 1945, the German High Command surrendered to Allied leaders. The long war in Europe was over. There was joy in victory, but with Germany defeated, Allied troops came face to face with evidence of Nazi atrocities. Auschwitz, Dachau, Treblinka, Buchenwald. Concentration camps housing thousands of living corpses. Countless Jews put to death in crematoriums and gas chambers. Mass graves holding thousands of bodies. Evidence of gruesome medical experiments conducted by the Nazis on their captives. History would reveal the true horrors of the Holocaust.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special news bulletin from CBS World News. A press association has just announced that President Roosevelt is dead.
12 years in the White House, a Great Depression and the world's greatest war had taken their toll on Franklin Roosevelt. With the passing of America's commander-in-chief, the weight of war fell to Harry S. Truman. Fighting in Europe was over, but the battle against Japan raged on. The new president would take extraordinary measures to finish the war and return the world to peace.